and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns podcast for September 25th, 2025. My name is Tom Luongo. We have a lot to talk about. It is episode 232, and I have with me today a new guest to the podcast. I've been on shows with her a couple of times already, and we've gotten along famously, and I thought it would be good to just have a sit-down chat one-on-one with Susan Kokinda of Promethean Action. Before I bring Susan in, if you care about your liberty and the right to control your own future, then I need to inform you of something very cool. From October 10th to the 12th, Mikkel Thorup, host of the Expat Money Show, is bringing together top experts from around the world for the Expat Money Online Summit, and it's completely free to attend. You'll learn about how to legally protect your wealth, secure second residences and citizenships, reduce your tax burden, and own property abroad, all to safeguard your freedom. So this year's focus is on Latin America, where opportunity is actually booming. Argentina is shifting to free markets and has the full backing of President Trump. El Salvador is undergoing a dramatic transformation, and Panama and Paraguay are offering simple residency programs. So a plan B, honestly, is no longer optional. It's essential. So reserve your free ticket at expatmoneysummit.com. That's expatmoneysummit.com. Susan, how are you?
I am fine.
Good. I'm glad you're here. Given that the fact that Donald Trump was scheduled to speak for 15 minutes at the UN and decided to speak for 55, I think that's probably a good place to start, to be honest with you. For those of you who don't know, Susan's the member of the Promethean Action Political Action Committee. I would say downstream of the Lyndon LaRouche movement of the 1970s, 1980s here in the United States. If you don't know who that is, well, there's this thing called Wikipedia, and it's terribly biased. So, Susan, tell me what you thought of Trump's barn burner of the speech, because I know what I thought.
I thought it was fantastic. The fact that he just honed in on what I consider one of the key ideological weapons of the British oligarchy, which is green fascism, and let's call it by its proper name, because, there really is an unbroken thread from the eugenics movement of the early 20th century, which directly gave us Adolf Hitler, right into the environmental movement. I think it was Julian Huxley when he was appointed one of the early heads of, I think, UNESCO.
Yes,
at the UN. Yeah, he basically, there's a quote, I should have dug it out, but he's got a quote where he basically says, we can't sell this eugenics shit any longer. We have to repackage it.
Nice.
And we're repackaging it as environmentalism.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a couple of decades for them to get this going. You had various relatively obscure organizations like the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which became the home for a lot of the eugenicists directly. They came over in there, and then you had Prince Philip and Prince Bernhard launching the World Wildlife Fund in 1961, 62. So, they were working on their propaganda. They were working on, setting up their institutions and so on. And then obviously by the end of the late 1960s and early 1970s, they were able to let this thing rip. And what I really liked about Trump's speech is he named by name the UN Environmental Program, because that really became the launching pad for a lot of that. With the original head being Maurice Strong from Canada, with all sorts of ties to the British establishment, to extractive industries, and so on and so forth. So, and when he said that not only the carbon footprint stuff is a hoax, he says it's evil. He put the name to it. It's not just stupid, which it certainly is, and unscientific. It's evil. Because the entire environmental movement is just the front end of an effort that the British royal family and other royal families have been clear on. They want to depopulate the planet, make it safe for empire. And if you have too many unruly, smart people, or people who could become smart and just think maybe they should have a future, it's hard to rule the world. So I thought that was the most powerful part of it. Obviously he lowered the boom on the migration waves, and also called that evil from the standpoint of human trafficking. He, and earlier in the day, Marco Rubio, called into question, what's the purpose of the UN? Very good question right now. So I thought it was a precision strike. That's what I thought.
Yeah, no, I described it on my market report yesterday for my patrons because we're doing it on a Thursday. I do that every Wednesday and Sunday. I described it as, did you notice that Donald Trump walked into the UN with two, not one, but two flaming bags of poop and threw them up in the air and then blew them away with shotguns to spread all over the delegation. What I really, really enjoyed about what he said was the way he personalized it to every leader in the room who he said, look, you're destroying your countries. Your people don't want you to destroy your countries. And that was the implication here. You're destroying your countries. Is this
Yeah,
what you want?
yeah,
And what are you doing with this unchecked migration, all of this human trafficking and everything else? All for what? For an agenda that is not going to survive because we are the United States and we are the leaders of the world and we are the greatest economy in the world and we are the greatest country to ever exist and we're not going along with that anymore. And so without our money, sorry, it doesn't work. Or as the Canadians would say, sorry, it's not working anymore.
yeah.
And because you brought up in the Canadian eugenicists earlier, and that's a shout out to my friend Matt Errett and my friend Chris Sims, all my friends up in Canada that I've met who are absolutely far more learned about the betrayal of the Canadian aristocracy of the Canadian people. So yeah, I thought that to me was the big one. It was an absolute declaration of war against not just the green fascism, as you would put it, which I completely agree with, but and the open borders and the rest of it, but it also just globalism in general, just the
Yeah.
concept itself that we should have these global institutions and all of them don't work. I mean, what's the purpose of the UN? The UN's not doing anything. It's not stopping wars. It's enabling. It's
Yeah.
not
I
stopping
mean, it
them.
was sort of like taking a jump from the speech he gave in 2020 at Davos.
Mm-hmm.
And when that speech, and of course, it was right before COVID broke out and
Right.
right before everything went to hell, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, he gave that speech and what he hit at in that speech, which was so important, besides saying things to the effect the world belongs to sovereign nations and not the globalists, that might have been another speech, but that was the
Sure.
import of this speech. But he also said, how can you be pessimistic? He said, look, we're not too far from Brunelleschi's dome in Florence, this
Mm-hmm.
incredible dome that was built during the Renaissance,
Right.
which is an amazing story that Lyndon LaRouche used to talk about all the time because it
Mm-hmm.
was actually started in the Dark Ages. And the base of the dome, the city fathers of Florence decided to build a dome bigger than anything that had ever been built. So they built the base
Right.
and they wanted a freestanding dome without flying buttresses and so on. So when they built it, they actually didn't know how they were going to complete it. And then you had the Dark Age. So it just like the plan sat there forever.
Right.
And then Brunelleschi came in and made basically a scientific breakthrough. But most importantly, he then taught the workmen of Florence basically new physical principles because he's asking them to climb up this huge hundreds and hundreds of foot thing and build it and believe that it's not going to collapse while they're building it. And they did. It lasts to this day. It's one of the most beautiful sights in all of Europe, Brunelleschi's dome. And Trump said, "Look at this. Look at what we did. Look at the problems we solved. We didn't know how we were going to finish that." It's kind of like Kennedy saying, "We're going to the moon. We don't know how, but we're going to the moon."
Sure.
Right? And that to me is what the oligarchy fears more than anything, because when people have a sense of the power of the human mind, that we can solve our problems, that we can meet new challenges, that we are set above the beast, because no animal could have built Brunelleschi's dome. That's when the oligarchy gets really, really nervous. And
Yep.
that's where I think, that's why they feared Kennedy,
Mm-hmm.
because he carried that up to, I mean, I'm a child of that era.
Right.
I was going to be an astronaut when I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And because that's what Kennedy enkindled in people. So they killed that. And they basically been beating it back, right, for the past 60 years. And Trump comes along and, inspires it. So, you take that speech in Davos where he walked into the belly of the beast,
Mm-hmm.
Davos, and said, "You people are all screwed up. And we're not playing by your rules any longer." Then they thought they had taken him out,
Yeah.
by denying him the election. And he and we fought our way back in. And
Mm-hmm.
so now he goes back in and he puts the whole thing on steroids.
Yeah, no, it's really obvious, and it's funny. You as you were talking about Brodowski's Dome, and it was funny. I'm thinking to myself, one, Italians. That's the way it's the way we operate. Like, no, it doesn't matter. We'll figure it out. Just go
Yeah.
start building. We'll figure it out. It's a thing, and and if you've ever been, I have friends of mine who are businessmen, and they're like, "Have you ever been to an Italian factory? Like, go to Germany first and go look at a German factory." And you're like, it all makes perfect logical sense, and it kind of works. And you go to an Italian factory, and it's just like insane thing that looks like chaos and is 14 times as efficient
Right, right.
because Italians. Um, but and that's just I'm going to indulge in my racism here because nepotism and all that. But moreover, to think about what their propaganda recently. Remember the Netflix movie Don't Look Up, right? That's what they want us. They don't ever want us looking up, right? So
Right.
that movie, the asteroid was coming in. So the what's the government's reaction to this to keep people from like freaking out? Don't look up. Don't just ignore the asteroid.
Right.
No. Don't try and stop the asteroid from ending the world. Don't look up and ignore it, and then everybody will just die. And
Yeah.
that's this thing. Don't aspire to anything. Don't look up. Just just go to work every day, put your head down because you can't affect anything. You have no agency in your life. We control your destiny and we know what's best for you.
And they could kind of get away with it for a while, but frankly, post 2000, I mean, because people could make it up
Mm-hmm.
to a point.
Mm-hmm.
You could still scramble and so on and have a house and maybe have a couple of kids and so on and so forth. That world kind of ended in 2008.
Oh, agreed.
And from that point on, they knew we weren't going to be able to even throw sops,
Mm-hmm.
to proletariat, and this is what drives Gen Z, Gen X, the millennials. I mean, they're sitting there saying, I was at the Michigan Republican Policy Conference this last weekend on Mackinac Island,
Mm-hmm.
and they had a final kind of wrap up panel, which had people representing different constituencies. And they had the head of the college Republicans, and they had someone representing the young Republicans, more of the millennials. And they both said the same thing. We couldn't, in the current economy, we couldn't even imagine owning a house until we're like 50 years old,
Right.
if then,
Right.
right? So, by crashing the economy, by moving into a new phase of insanity, which is hyperinflation and further shrinking productive jobs and so on, they took a couple of generations and they basically just threw them to the wolves. Now they figured they could pacify them, with entertainment, drugs, social media and so on. And then along came Donald Trump and
Mm-hmm.
said, no, there actually is a way out of this. And I don't think it really took hold until we got into 2024. And now with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, as Erica Kirk said, they have no idea what they've unleashed.
I,
Because
I agree.
this generation, which which really does have nothing, and they were told you're going to have nothing and you're going to be happy,
Mm-hmm.
and you're happy,
Right.
ordering Uber or whatever, but that's over.
Yeah.
And now something a new flame has sort of been fed into that rarefied atmosphere. And again, I don't think they have any idea what they've unleashed.
No, I really don't think they have either. What's interesting, or maybe they do. It's funny. The more I think about this, and I've been thinking about this a lot recently. But what you just said about owning a house, and I've been thinking about Trump's singular focus on the relisting of Fannie and Freddie and the Great American Mortgage Company and all of that stuff because I'm deep into that. And I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about Brexit. I've been thinking about Trump's first election. I've been thinking about the 2008 financial crisis and how important the government sponsored 30-year fixed rate mortgages and all of those things. And I say to myself, if I'm a dirty commie, which these people are, go through the planks of the end of the envy of the unquenchable envy of Marxist political thought, and you realize that their goal is always to destroy the middle class, right? To take away their ability to generate generational wealth and to have a functional middle class, because a functional middle class isn't ever going to, create the workers' revolution. So you have to take the functional middle class away from them, take that lifestyle away from them, radicalize them, hand them the unquenchable envy of Marxism to go animate their murderous spree, and let's go kill all the rich people who aren't the rich people they can see, as opposed to the ones who are actually pulling
Who
all the
are really
strings.
running it.
Yeah, they're actually pulling the strings, right? Marxism is just yet another false dialectic, just to allow these people to change, to meet the new boss same as the old boss, as the Who would put it,
Mm-hmm.
right? So now I'm thinking about this and I'm going, wow. So the entire 2008 financial crisis was the mechanism by which to destroy the 30-year government sponsored mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's why Fannie and Freddie were quote unquote bailed out. They weren't bailed out. They were the bad bank that bailed out AIG,
Right.
who was the one that was in trouble. And Fannie and Freddie took the blame. Obama took control of them, put them in conservatorship, stole all their friggin' profits. They were never unprofitable. And
Mm-hmm.
then turned around and used that money to fund Obamacare and keep them. And the plan was to keep them in conservatorship forever. And then write new mortgage requirement and underwriting rules that look like the same underwriting rules they have in Canada and
Mm-hmm.
for any long-term mortgage or anywhere else. I was talking to a Canadian friend of mine the other day about this. He's like, yeah, like we have the 30-year mortgage in Canada. And I said, well, explain to me the terms. He's like, and he starts listing them off. I'm like, well, that's what we have now. That's not what we ever had before. That's not what we had before. So, and then it all just fell into place. And then what do? Then you go to the zero bound, you jack up, and you pay the boomers off to sell their ancestral homes at, you know, 10 times what they paid for it, fund their retirement, look down their nose at their kids, their Gen X kids who they always hated anyway. To say, no, we're not going to pass any of the wealth on. Go out and work for yourself, you lazy fucking bum, which is what they've been telling us since we were 12 years old. Now, my parents were silent generation. They didn't do that, but every other boomer parent I've ever met did that. Sorry, boomers. You know how much I hate y'all. And then
I'm a boomer, so be
I know
careful.
you are. That's no offense. You're a good boomer. There are a few of them. Most of them
All
are
right. All right.
most of them are my patrons. Oh, by the way,
All right.
and so is Donald Trump. But my point is that the boomer generation, the ethos of the boomer generation has always been this, and there's a certain kind of like spiritual boomerism is what a friend of mine likes to call it. I'm being unfair here, but let's just, you know what I'm talking about. So you have this setup, and then they're like, well, we're going to go on cruise to Alaska. We're going to go see the world that we never got a chance to see because we've been working our entire lives. Even if they're not, even if they're not wrong and saying go out and build it yourself. I'm like, but Dad, I can't.
Yeah, not in this. You can't do that anymore in this
Right, we
economy.
can't do that anymore, and they don't understand it because the whole point of inflation is to make it impossible for the older generations and the younger generations to be able to compare notes about what it's like to actually live. Because
Mm-hmm.
past a certain point in terms of income, food costs don't matter to you. Like, it doesn't matter how much steak costs because you've got enough money.
Mm-hmm.
$20 a pound, who cares? Like, whatever, we can still have it. Okay, maybe we only have steak 4 times a month as opposed to 5. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really hit you. So the whole point of this was then to go to the zero bound, jack the interest rates down to zero, jack housing prices to infinity, take away all the jobs, deracinate what's left of the friggin' suburbs. A lot of the private equity firms like BlackRock and everybody else to come in and buy up all the single family,
Right.
jack the prices up even further, then go through a massive inflation post-COVID, and everybody's standing around going, how the hell am I ever going to get a job? How am I ever going to get a job to buy a house? Which was the whole point of moving us into 15, which was the whole point to move us into 15-minute arcologies.
Right.
It was all planned. And I hate to do, like, Dexter White's going to listen to this. He's going to be like really angry with me that I like just put it all in a linear narrative because he hates when I do this. But I think I'm right about that. Because if I'm Emperor Palpatine, if I'm the British Empire, which is what Emperor Palpatine is based on, that's what I would do. If I understood how to manipulate currencies and bond yields and everything else. I read a great thread the other day. I don't know if I don't know how much you know about the history on greenbacks in Lincoln and the
A
Civil
little
War.
bit. I mean,
Yeah,
I've got a friend who's written a whole book on it, but
yeah, and I'm actually going to publicly announce now that I'm going to apologize to Ellen Brown, who's one of the more modern proponents of greenbacks. But when I was a dumb anarcho-capitalist, I used to like scream about this that this was stupid. But apparently, none, and I'm going to make this point real quick, is that the greenback was Lincoln's way of paying for the war, and he was going to move to full faith and credit of the U.S. government as the backing for the currency. Now, hard money guy like myself, that's not necessarily great, but what happened? What was the response from the British banks? was to put pressure on Congress to make sure that you couldn't pay back you couldn't pay back bonds in anything other than gold, and you couldn't
Right.
pay for customs duties in anything other than gold. So the
Right.
greenback then fell 30 cents on the dollar, which they then bought up at 30 cents on the dollar, and then demanded, against the bonds that were issued, then demanded to be paid back at par. They've been doing running that same scam. Paul Singer's been running that same scam, and the rest of these guys against Argentinian debt and Chilean debt and everything, and all these other debts. And they've been running that same scam through the IMF the entire time you and I have been alive. It's the same scam.
Yeah. Yeah. They haven't learned a whole lot new.
Yeah.
And,
Well, why would they? It's the greatest scam ever made.
yeah,
Right.
until you get some people who come along, and whether they call it the American system or not, this administration, some of the people in it, like J.D. Vance and Besant, every so often reference the American system, reference Alexander Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
But they're so terrified of this because they can always run these kind of manipulations. If you think that your currency needs to be tied to something which is physical in the sense of gold or whatever, or controllable by somebody else. But if you look at Alexander Hamilton's report on manufactures, where he says the wealth of a nation is not its gold, it's not its raw materials, it's not even its land,
Mm-hmm.
it's the productive powers of labor, by which he means the ability to constantly improve man's relationship to nature through technology, through education, through longer living standards, and so on. Now, think of if you're actually making your decisions, if you're measuring your economic decisions and even the issuance of your currency with that as really your metric. Now you've got to somehow tether your currency to this, and that's what the gold reserve standard was up until 1971. But a lot of people are confused. They think, oh, we had the gold standard before 1971. No, gold standard, you only issue a dollar for a dollar of gold. And as you said, what happens when the other guys own the gold,
Mm-hmm.
right? Whereas the American system is based on the idea, and Hamilton was very clear on this. There's nothing wrong with going into debt as long as by doing so, you created the means to extinguish the debt.
Yes.
So if you're going to invest in a new factory, which is going to make you more productive and give you a profit, you're going to extinguish the debt.
Yep.
If you're going to send man to the moon, and by doing so, force you to make all sorts of technological breakthroughs, which we would not have made in the time frame otherwise, which is why we got 10 cents back for every dollar we spent on the Apollo project.
Mm.
You've created the means for extinguishing the debt. It's a different way of thinking, and it gets out of the world of money. Now,
I'm going to stop right there. It's actually not. That's actually the way the system is supposed to work. When you're a company, when you're an entrepreneur, you have two ways of financing your idea. You can either buy debt or you can sell equity, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's one or the other, and there's
Right.
nothing wrong. And there's nothing wrong with either of those things. It all depends on the cost of capital that's available to you at that moment in time.
Well, it's one of my favorite stories about Henry Ford.
Right.
Because when Henry Ford wanted to build the first assembly line in Highland Park, he had the Dodge brothers on the board of directors with him. And they just wanted a coupon clip. They just wanted their stock dividends.
Right.
And he says, no, I'm going to have to use some of this to build this new plant. So he just bought them out.
Right.
And then he used the equity because he did not want to go into debt. He hated Wall Street, as I think everybody knows. And he built the Highland Park plant, which was the first assembly line in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time that thing was kicking, he was building more cars than all the other car makers in the world combined.
Right.
But again, it was, because he made a lot of money, he used a lot of money, but for him, money was just always plow it back in. How can you make it more productive?
Well, and this is the thing this is the misconception about debt and profit and everything else. And this is where, at times, like there are, I have no issue with interest as a concept. Interest is the thing that coordinates the demand and the supply for money based on based on the needs of the human capital that's available out there, and it should be a floating rate it should always be a floating rate, and that's why I have no real use for a central bank and blah 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 blah. Now I say that knowing full well that I defended the Federal Reserve in the recent years because things are so unbelievably cocked up and weird that we have to actually use the Fed as a weapon against all the other evil central banks that are out there. But that's that's a temporary problem. And sometimes you have to make a deal with a dragon in order to fight other dragons because you're a dude with a sword. That's just the way things are. So but the basic concept of even any kind of non-market interest rate for money or cost of capital rate for money is just it's anathema to human entrepreneurship and human ingenuity. And so that's the key, is to get back as close to that process as possible. And that's what and that's for the most part what most of the hard money crowd is trying to focus on. That they get lost in the religiosity of both
Yeah, right.
Bitcoin and gold and everything else,
Yeah,
because
right.
people who don't have a functional religion always create one. I don't care if it's gold, Bitcoin, Star Wars, or the spaghetti monster. But that's the way things work, and that's because that's the way the human mind works. I'd prefer them to pick something that was a little bit more sustainable than any of the things just mentioned. um Me personally, I'm still confused as to how the universe operates, and none of my opinions about it matter anyway, so who cares?
Well,
Now,
the universe ultimately will tell you whether you're right or wrong.
bingo. Bingo. That's why I'm like, you know what? The universe is far more interesting than anything I have to say about it. So let's just leave that on the cutting room floor, and we'll move on. Let's talk about how we're going to get shit done tomorrow. But I've said many times that if God created the world in 6 days, on the seventh day he rested, on the eighth day man created money to get shit done. Right? It's not hard. So, but I mean, I think that's where we're going here for the way we have to start rethinking some of our quote unquote free market principles on how we're going to fix things. We're in a very perilous moment in time, I think, from an institutional standpoint. And sometimes, and I really do believe that you sometimes are going to have to do that which you would be against your quote unquote principles in order to stabilize the situation to get things done. It's like it's doing triage. It's at the end of the day, it's the way things are. For
Well, it's a
example.
lot of, for a lot of people, I think they have to, I've had so many people, when I'm out in the political sphere,
Mhm.
saying, all right, I've had to rethink everything I thought,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I've been preaching American system versus British free trade for 50 years.
Right.
I've been out there trying to organize people on the ground over this for 50 years. And, maybe 1/10 of 1% got it.
Right.
Um, then along comes Donald Trump, says, boom, tariffs, right? And people love Donald Trump and they say, well, okay, I didn't think I was for that, but I trust Donald Trump because I know what he's gone through to get back into the presidency and so on. So if he's for tariffs, then I have to rethink what I think my principles are. And I think that's terrific because it's actually forcing people to go back and deal with this much more fundamentally. Because, it's so easy. Free trade, it's free,
Yeah.
bullshit. There's no such thing.
Right.
And
Yeah, the any this is one of the other things I like to how I like to describe this is that we have free trade, but it's only within the boundaries of the box of economic activity that we're allowed to have. And that box has been defined by other people. So they allow the illusion of free trade they exist within that box. Being a chemist and a quantum mechanics guy, to me, this is just the particle in the box. We're the particle in the box, and they've set the rules of the box. Problem is that a lot of capital leaks outside the box, and then
yeah.
use that capital to reinforce the box, and we get to think that we're really just rats in a cage pushing a Skinner box button against each
Well, I
other
actually had an
and calling it
interesting,
free trade. It's ridiculous.
yeah, I had an interesting discussion this weekend at the conference with a fairly impressive young up and coming Republican figure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I showed him the half-page flyer our political group has created, which is the New Republican of Donald Trump versus the Uniparty.
Mm-hmm.
And on the back, it contrasts Trump's tariff policies to free trade. And he looked at it and he says, oh, I really like this. He said, but, I don't think you're really against free trade. I said, yes, I am. He said, no, if everybody abided by it, it would work. And then and I said, I don't think so. We talked about it a little bit further. And then he popped out with something which I thought was really interesting. He said, well, it works within the confines of a system which is embedded in certain values. And I said, bingo.
Yes.
So, it's not free trade. It's where are you trying to go with your society?
Hmm.
Are you trying to just screw everybody, loot the entire planet, and have a couple of people who made it to the top, the economic equivalent of Survivor?
Right.
Or do you have another purpose for your society? And it's within that purpose for your society that, then you let economic rules and obviously a certain, free exchange of ideas and creativity and so on and so forth. But it was a really kind of interesting discussion because we went from sort of the labels
Hmm.
to much more of the actual concept.
Yeah, no, it's very obvious at a certain level. It's like you bring all this up, right? And here's the funny part about it: what happened last week when Jerome Powell, Mister High Priest of Keynesianism himself, because he's the head of the Federal Reserve, and what did he say the other day? Oh, well, tariffs were a little bit inflationary up front, but they're not going to be inflationary in the
Right,
long run.
right.
And well, I always knew that Powell was eventually going to say this. Oh, by the way, I could see this coming from, I could see this like this coming from like a mile away, especially when at Jackson Hole, he also got rid of the 2% inflation target and said, we're going to focus on American labor, the health of the American labor market, which is to your point that this is all about how can we unlock the potential of the American, the American labor force there's that, right? What was interesting is that I've been saying to myself for a long time, I'm like, yeah, no, if you don't think that Scott Bessent and Jerome Powell have been like, okay, how do we roll this out? And what's the order of operations? We have to roll this thing out because, of course, because that those two guys are going to sit there and say, well, and even if Powell did believe the tariffs were inflationary, say back in March he did, and Bessent's going to be sitting there every Monday morning, go, but Jerome, are you printing more money with the tariff? And he's like, well, no. I'm like, well, then it's not inflationary. Tariffs don't inflate, don't create more money, and they don't destroy money. They just move around who gets, a bigger or lesser proportion of the existing stock of money. From the quantity theory of money perspective, right? There's no money gained or destroyed. Now, every time you raise or lower interest rates and people are paying off debt or not paying off debt, that's when money is created and destroyed. That's a different process. And that process is independent of whether or not Donald Trump is laying tariffs on our trade partners or not. And
Yeah.
eventually, even if Powell is, like a full-blown dyed-in-the-wool Keynesian, like, he's the first Gentile to ever control the Federal Reserve, and he's the first American to ever control the Federal Reserve. The guy's an eighth-generation American, like Bessent is. Like, you think he's a race trader? Like, no. And this is the funny part about it. Like, I hate to bring up the whole Jew Gentile thing, but it's true, so we need to bring it up. So it's just funny. Like I've been watching this for so long, and I'm like, no, seriously, we're gonna look back, and we're gonna go, oh no, Powell was the guy who set up the reform of the Federal Reserve, and they're all gonna hate him on the way out the door. They're gonna write history books about Powell, how he was a terrible guy. You wait, it's gonna be like that for the next 30 years, 40 years. Powell's gonna be the new Arthur Burns.
Well, it's going to be
bet,
interesting because
bet your life on it.
it's clear the administration is setting this up,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to carry out reforms over time. I mean, I do weekly shows, you do stuff, why don't they shut down the Fed tomorrow morning? Well, give me a break. Please explain to me, number one, how you're going to get Congress to do that. And number two, what do you put in its place?
Right.
I mean, we have a relatively complicated world. I know the principles of national banking. So we
Mm-hmm.
had a national bank under Hamilton and John Quincy Adams. Then we had national banking under Abraham Lincoln. We've had sort of a little bit of hybrids with things like the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, but that's just more like a development bank. So, and now we're in the 21st century with, quantum computers and, algorithms and exotic financial interests and so on and so forth. Uh, do I know what national banking looks like in the 21st century? No, but I have a feeling that people like Scott Bessent, and people like that are actually thinking about what does it look like and how are you going to get there? And it's not going to be fast.
No.
But but the discussion has started. That's what I enjoy.
Oh,
Sort of like, me trying to proselytize about, free trade being bad for 50 years and nobody listening. The same thing in terms of the Fed. Now, with free trade, maybe 1/10 of 1% understood it. On the Fed, I'd say maybe 1% understood it.
sure.
There's a bit of an anti-Fed culture out there, going back to, well, really, the foundation of the Fed. It's only a couple of generations
Sure.
back.
Yeah.
Um, But now everybody's talking about it.
Well, and it's because Trump decided to popularize the issue and do what he
Hmm.
always does. And then
Exactly.
when he goes to popularize an issue, Donald Trump, good WWE guy he is, creates a bad guy and then makes a scapegoat. And Jerome Powell's like, okay, I'm it, whatever. And Powell doesn't care. This is the funny part about this conversation about, well, what's this thing with Trump and Powell? Because of course, the minute he comes out after Powell, I mean, literally my Twitter DMs are blowing up, my text messages are blowing up, and my patrons are screaming, "What's going on?" I'm like, have you met Donald Trump? Like, really? Like, you can't see this coming from a mile away. I'm like, yeah, for about 30 seconds, I was like, really, Trump? Oh, no, never mind. This is not. Let's just put it this way. You've got three guys at the top of the three of the most powerful men in the world right now: the president of the United States, the Treasury Secretary, and the head of the Federal Reserve. All three are independently wealthy. They're all men at the end of their careers who have absolutely no desire, have no need to be doing the job that they're doing. When Powell was going through the terrible manipulations to keep him from coming in for a second term, Daniel DiMartino Booth, myself, and a couple of others kept saying the same thing. He doesn't need to do this. He can leave. He can go. He can go into private equity right now. If Lael Brainerd would come in and become Fed chair, Powell would go out and he'd make billions in private equity because of the crap that she's going to do. And he decided to stick it out at the Fed. Like, it doesn't compute. He's there because he's worried about the future of the country and the Fed's role in the future of the country. And that's what he's doing. And in his way, I think he set the table. I think he and Wall Street absolutely set the table. You and I talked about this a little bit. Set the table with the change to the secured overnight financing rate to set the foundation to allow the political change that is now coming. And it's Trump's job now to sell this very esoteric idea of how we organize and capital and how we utilize capital and whether it should be a proper function of the Treasury and whether bank regulation should be a proper function of the Treasury or whether all that should be up under the Federal Reserve. And
Yeah.
I don't see Powell out there like arguing, oh, no, you can't take the bank regulation away from us. I'm thinking to myself, Powell's like, yes, please,
Well,
please.
I'm going to reserve judgment on Jerome Powell, but on the rest of it, in terms of what this administration is doing, it is clear to me.
Mm-hmm. No, I think nothing like this happens unless Powell is the guy doing what he's needed to do at this moment in time. Because look, as I said before, if you think about what policy that Trump and Bessent have run since they've been in office, which is a weak dollar policy, putting up protection tariffs, um, has Powell's high interest rate policy has only supported that. It's only driven the euro higher. It's only driven the pound higher when they don't have any exports into this new tariff regime. So it's like you're hitting them twice. You're not only like beating them with a baseball bat, you're beating them with a baseball bat after you've driven two spikes through it, and we're reenacting Escape from New York. Like this is the scenario because a strong currency plus a protection tariff makes it impossible for for those people to actually trade with you, the exporters to trade with you, and that's why the German economy is falling off a cliff even faster. And of course, if that would also then dovetail with Trump's desire to end the war in Ukraine and end Europe's war of aggression against Russia. So it makes perfect sense from a geopolitical perspective for Powell to hold on for as long as possible while Trump popularizes the idea of getting rid of the Fed. And then Powell comes in and changes policy, gets rid of the stupid 2% mandate, which was put in place by globalist Bernanke, against his judgment, against his not judgment, but his opposition when he was a junior member of the Fed back in 2007. He was there, and he and Richard Fisher and a couple of others were all like, "You can't do this."
Yeah.
And Bernanke's like, "We're doing it." Well, of course, because he was told from on high that it's time for us to do this. And
Yeah.
that's why, like, watching all of these things play out, and the more I learn about the history of the internals of the Fed and the way this all played itself out, to me, it's crystal clear that Powell was given to Trump originally by Wall Street because he understood what is necessary to get done to start the process of doing all the things that he wants to do and that they want to do. And whether they're doing it is so that they can become masters of the banking universe as opposed to the City of London. Hey, that's a different problem for a different day. I'm not averse to having that conversation, but as of right now, I think it's very obvious that that's the dynamic. I don't know where we go from here, but like I'm happy to keep to take it from there. But I think
Yeah.
all I'm getting at is I think that Trump is getting more support internally than I think even people realize from within the power structure on DC.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about the government shutdown? Wouldn't that be
Oh,
the great?
oh,
Wouldn't that be the greatest thing ever?
yeah. I mean, we may have two. I'm sitting in Michigan. They may have a government shutdown here.
Oh, can we throw all the Muslims out of
For
Dearborn, Michigan?
precisely the for well, I kind of weighed in on this on our live Q&A a little while ago. People have
Sure.
got to really be very careful when they start talking about the Muslims.
I know.
Donald Trump won Michigan because of Muslim Americans,
Okay.
right?
Right.
I'm sitting right next to Dearborn Heights, a couple of miles from Hamtramck. The mayor of Hamtramck, Mayor Golub, the mayor of Dearborn Heights, Bill Bazzi, they are now ambassadors for Donald Trump. One's in Tunisia, and I can't remember where the other one went.
Mm,
Um, and when you're talking about Muslims, you got to talk about two things. You've got to talk about patriotic, God-fearing. Their God is not that different from our God. Our doctrines are different, obviously, but God-fearing, patriotic people who came to this country and are playing an important role. And they are the reason Donald Trump won Michigan. I
mhm.
want people to understand that because I'm really tired of this.
Okay, fair. No, I love getting pushed back on my
Yeah. Um,
newly found racism. It's good.
yeah.
I'm okay with it.
Now, then you have British created Muslim fundamentalism,
Hmm.
which is where you've got ISIS, Al Qaeda, any crazy person. I mean, I've seen the video clips that's going out from the guy in Dearborn, in terms of we're going to take over and, blah, blah. Yeah, of course, you've got a British intelligence operation,
Hmm.
same British intelligence operation that created Christian Zionism in the
Right.
19th century,
Right.
right? They play the two off against each other. So, I mean, I know obviously places like London, Paris, and elsewhere, have been inundated by especially Muslim immigration. And, a lot of this is, shaped by these British intelligence operations and so on. But you also just have a plain old clash of culture because unlike many of the Muslims who immigrated here
Hmm.
in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s that went to work in the auto plants, and, like any other immigrant community,
Right.
I have Polish immigrants and Irish immigrants, you ultimately assimilate.
Right.
You still honor
Of
your
course.
culture.
Of course.
We still have a lot of big Polish festivals here, right? You honor your culture. You still are a Roman Catholic and you go to a Polish church, or right down the street from me is a Hungarian Reformed church where they still speak Hungarian,
Hmm.
right? So you
Nice.
still honor your culture. And, I have no problem with, people honoring their cultures from Lebanon and, Yemen and so on and so forth. And that is frankly the majority of them.
Of
That
course.
is the majority of them. Then you get the Rashida Tlaibs, the Elon Omars, and probably a whole layer of young Muslims who are becoming radicalized because of the horrors of Gaza,
Hmm.
who, can then be manipulated and turned. But, I think I'm fingers crossed in terms of this meeting that Trump had with Muslim leaders at the UN, which there's been very little coverage of.
Oh wow. Yeah, yeah. If you want to talk about that, I'd love to hear it.
Well, from what it looks like, I mean, he's bringing in Muslim countries from outside the region, like Indonesia
Right.
and others, as part of a process of um, rebuilding Gaza, Arab peacekeeping forces, but you're not going to have an Arab peacekeeping force from Lebanon.
Right.
I mean, Muslim peacekeeping forces. It's going to have to be from outside the region.
Yes.
The rumors are that, he basically said to Netanyahu, no, you are not going to do what you think you're going to do in Gaza.
Hmm.
Again, these are secondhand reports. Witkoff apparently came out of the meeting like this. So we're going to have to see how it unfolds. But I think, if Trump can settle this, well, we're going to go, it's going to take a while, but we're going to go back to where we were. We've gone through two phases in terms of this Muslim question. One was after 9/11, obviously. And of course, we blame Saddam Hussein for what the Saudis did. Um, but that inflamed an awful lot, and that lasted for a good 2 decades
Yep.
in the United States. And then Trump came along, and especially in this last election, where, the Muslim Arab community said, we may not agree with you on a lot. We may not even agree with you in terms of how you want to settle Gaza or whatever. Um, but we believe that you want peace. unlike every president who's come before you, who has not wanted peace. They have just been playing a geopolitical game.
Hmm.
They truly believe that Donald Trump wanted peace. And that's where we got these enormous swings
Hmm.
in key areas of Wayne County. And it was Wayne County that nailed it. Because
Hmm.
even though Wayne County is not going to go Republican, probably, well, maybe in my lifetime if I live long enough,
Sure.
all you have to do in Wayne County is move 6, 7% of the vote, and you've got it. And that is what and that's where I am, and that is what
Okay.
we
Yeah.
did,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We had between the blue collar workers, which has sort of been, my focus,
Hmm.
getting across the new Republican Party is the party of the working class, which resonated very, very strongly in the blue collar areas of Wayne County, also Macomb. But everyone knows Wayne County is where they steal the elections,
Right.
right?
Same thing in Philadelphia. Same thing in Broward.
Right.
It used to be.
So, how many people, I mean, I went to bed on election night. I said, I'm too old to stay up all night. I'll wake up at some point and find out what's going on. And then they call Michigan at like 11:15 at night.
Hmm.
Well, how did that happen? Because the buckets of absentee ballots that they had ready to go, which they obviously used in 2020, they knew they didn't have enough buckets
Yep.
to overwhelm what had happened in Dearborn, Hamtramck, Dearborn Heights, and in the blue collar areas. We just smoked them by getting people they did not expect to vote to come out and vote for Donald Trump. And at that point, they knew there's no point, we can't steal it. And
Yep.
they had to call Michigan.
Yeah, and I think the same thing happened in Philadelphia, and in Pittsburgh, and I can tell you that since we cleaned up the voter rolls, for example, in Florida, not just the voter rolls, but the voter processing system, where we don't have individual different systems based on how corrupt the county is. By the way,
Right.
we have one similar system for everything, and it used to be that it's funny. My wife was an election worker at the supervisor of elections during the Bush versus Gore fiasco and all the hanging chads and all that down in Broward County. And she's in Alachua County, which is communist. I mean, no, I'm not going to argue. It's the University of Florida. It's the People's Republic of Alachua County. But, there's no voter fraud in Alachua County. We use the Scantron ballots, and they hold on to them, and they did a hand count, and the hand count was exactly the same as the machine count and everything else. And, it was a perfectly valid system. It's the system that we now use all over the state of Florida.
Yeah.
The people, there's no voter fraud in Alachua County. The people are just stupid. Like, it's just,
Well, we haven't
and
cleaned
that's
it up.
fine. If the people vote badly, well, there's nothing I can do about
That's,
that.
yeah.
You lose an election in Alachua County.
But we didn't. But the point I want to
Yeah,
make
I
is we
know.
haven't cleaned it up.
Yeah,
Michigan is one of the
it's,
worst states in the country. I mean,
right.
we have this
And you
lunatic,
still were able to overcome. Yeah.
and we
So,
were still able to overcome it by
yeah.
outflanking them by getting voters that they did not expect, and
Yeah.
that's the key.
Well, what was really interesting is that once we cleaned the voter rolls up in Florida, then we started to get a real sense of what it actually looks like in West Palm, Broward, and Miami-Dade,
Mm,
and Orange County, by the way, which for those of you who don't know is Orlando,
mhm.
where they allowed Puerto Rico to get wiped out multiple times by hurricanes, and then they moved all the Puerto Ricans into Orlando, and then tried to get them all to vote Democrat, which is what happened for a little while, or at least that's what we think how they voted, because who the hell knows how many of them actually voted and how many of them didn't vote. But they did the same thing in Tampa, and so they were just zip code targeting various places around the state in order to turn Florida blue. It never worked. And once DeSantis cleaned up the voter rolls, that was never going to happen, which is part of the reason why they were, interestingly, just so you know, this is how bad Alachua County is. They sold the fairgrounds, which is this big, beautiful fairgrounds right next to the Gainesville airport. Which is where we had, the medieval fair every year and the Alachua County Fair. And the medieval fair in Alachua County, in Gainesville, was one of the biggest in the state. It was like, people came in from all over the state for it. We had jousting and all sorts of great stuff, falconers, the whole nine yards, like one of the greatest. And they sold it to FEMA to put trailers on so that they could start zip code targeting out in the rural parts of the
Wow.
of the county, where they were approving trailer parks in places that they had effectively condemned by forcing low density zoning on, meaning if you broke up a 20-acre rural parcel in Alachua County, you can break it up into 4 or 5 acre parcels, but you have to cluster all the houses on a 4-acre parcel and leave the other 16 which is effectively condemning the land because now you're
Right.
living rural, but you got to live you got to live right next to your neighbors as if you live in a fucking burb clave built by
Right.
Nar or Pulte, right? No, right? But they did all this shit on purpose, and then they condemned all the land, and then they bought it all. And they were going to stick trailers on it so they can bring IQ 60 Somalis in.
Mm.
Like this, they were planning on this. Was the plan of the Biden administration, and they were doing it in my backyard. And we're like, and then they sold the fairgrounds.
Mm.
It's just disgusting. These people, you can't hate them enough. Truly cannot hate them enough. So, and it's not going to change anytime soon until until DeSantis finally bankrupts the University of Florida, which we start from scratch. But I digress.
Yes.
So, I mean, but this is these stories. I guess what I'm getting at here is that these stories of what we see in various parts of the country for 2026 and 2028, watching where they refuse to clean up the voter rolls are still going to be the places where we're going to have to deal with it anyway. And even in the face of that, Trump's popularity is so high that he can actually overcome all of that.
Yeah, well, one of the very interesting factors, which gets back to what Erica Kirk said in terms of you don't know what you've unleashed.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in, if you're in the trenches in terms of trying to get voters out to vote, one of the big focuses for the past couple of years inside the Republican Party has been the fact that the evangelicals don't vote.
Right.
It's like 7% in the last off-year election. No, the numbers are shocking. Now, I don't know if that was the last off year. I think it probably improved somewhat in a presidential election, but not marginally. So you take that group of people who have just been, awakened and energized and, are passionate now in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination. You look at that memorial, you look at the response throughout the country, throughout the world, and so on. You get those, if that layer begins to actually vote in numbers commensurate with the rest of the country, that can make all the difference in terms of the midterm elections.
It won't just make it'll ensure that there's a durable political advantage for whatever it is that Trump is building now for the next 2 generations.
Exactly.
I mean, that's what we're staring at right now, and there's no amount of illegal. I mean, just the ending the illegal immigration and sending half of them back home is going to be enough to get a 30 or 40 seat majority in the House come next fall. Anyway, I mean, we're talking about the kind of thing where this is a super majority that you're looking at a potential scenario reversal of what it looked like during FDR years, where the Republican Party was an afterthought. In American politics until Ronald Reagan.
And I think the globalists, the smarter ones, are recalibrating and figuring out, okay, the Democratic Party, as we've turned it into the party of batshit crazy lunatics, that dog don't hunt. I mean, it may hunt for a little while in, some of the cities and so on, but it's not working. So I want people to keep their eye on Michigan. Because we actually have the mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan, who was put in by the billionaires about 15 years ago to make Detroit kind of the poster child for the WEF. Detroit, which was completely bombed out, you couldn't walk down Woodward Avenue in the middle of the day in the 1980s, now is a beautiful, glistening, modern city with sports arenas and restaurants, and you feel good. I'm a native Detroiter. I mean, I feel a lot better looking at Detroit today than in the 1990s. But then you find out how they did it. They did it on the backs of the neighborhoods. They did it with huge tax abatements, raising the property taxes on the people in the neighborhoods, gentrifying more and more and more of the city. Okay, so that's Duggan's great success story, and everybody thinks it's wonderful and so on. He's now running for governor as an independent. We have an important governor's race in 2026. The Republicans have not settled on a candidate. There's like 5 people or 6 at the last count in the race. The Democrats are not united.
Right.
They've got the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson. They've got the lieutenant governor. They got a bunch of people already. So they aren't even settled. So they're going to be in a cat fight until the primary. And the billionaires on both sides are backing Duggan. And, this is a plurality. It's not out of the question Duggan could win as an independent. in Michigan. And I think this is part of, the globalists beginning to regroup, saying, okay, well,
Mhm.
we use this Democratic Party as long as it's any good, just like they discarded the old Republican Party of Teddy Roosevelt,
Right.
at a certain point, like you were
Mhm.
saying, where it's an afterthought. I think people see the Democratic Party is becoming an afterthought. I mean, I don't think we can be complacent about 2026, but that's the direction it's going. So their recap, what are they going to do next? You've got this no labels group, which is really what Duggan is sort of like the poster boy for. Oh, both parties are so polarized. Aren't you tired of both parties? And, can't we just get together and talk about policy and so on? So, I just think people have to keep their ears up in
Oh yeah.
terms of, the elites think in generations,
Mhm.
and they could care less about any particular institution or any person or any country. They discard them like they discard old socks,
Mhm.
and they're ready to discard this smelly old sock called the Democratic Party and figure out what's going to come next because their other problem is, man, they do not control the Republican Party any longer.
No, well,
Donald Trump has got that locked down.
yeah, and that is that is very much obvious. What I was going to say is, I think it's pretty clear from the what remnant of the Democratic Party is still active that they've all been told it's time to go for Civil War 2.0. And I fully see every move that Gavin Newsom is making, that Kathy Hochul and whatnot in New York, what they're doing. And I'll be honest with you, now you're bringing up Duggan. I'm like, okay, like I have a new map of the world, of the United States, that looks like all of the Democratic strongholds try to secede from the Union to deny us the waterways and all the warm water port, all the really important ports, and leave us a quote unquote landlocked hub. Meaning, you take the entire Northeast, the West, the left coast, and most of the areas around the Great Lakes, along with Canada, and that's their new outpost to deny us as a kind of area denial strategy. I can see this. I can see what they're doing. You can see what they're doing in Canada with Mark Carney. You can see how they're going to try and um, uh, 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 um, defy ICE in Chicago. Now we've got Michigan on. Now I'm hearing that from you from Michigan. Like it's very clear to me that this is part of what they're New York and all the rest of the Northeast. So what are they doing? They're making regional alliances to go against the CDC's recommendations on vaccines and this and that. And they're trying to, okay, what do we have? What can we salvage here? How can we further split people? How can we polarize people even further and force Donald Trump into an action that we can then scream dictator? That's their goal. They're trying to run the Lincoln script on him.
Yeah, I think they're trying it, but I think as long as we keep our nerve and we're not stupid,
Right.
that's a very important thing. Our side has to not be stupid. And so far we're doing okay.
Right.
But you look at New Jersey, they just came out with the polls.
Mm-hmm.
Republican is running neck and neck with the
Mm-hmm.
Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
New Jersey, there's one of your coastal
I know.
cities.
It's a
So
very important, it's a very important industrial hub for, it's
yeah,
very
and
important.
I mean, that's why I've been so focused on this question of the new Republican Party, which is really the old Republican Party of Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
It's the party of the producers. And when you get, I mean, the way that the Democrats and the people who really run them, they operate. I keep coming back to this terrific quote from Scott Bessent. I keep, whenever I give a speech in front of Republican Democrats, I always joke, I never thought I would be enamored of a Treasury Secretary. Right? I mean, they've all been creatures from the Black Lagoon, right?
I
And
agreed.
this guy is amazing. But in one interview he did, he said, the Democratic Party has a strategy which is called compensate the losers, right? So you take away their ability to support themselves, support a family, and have any kind of identity and so on, and then you throw money at them, and then they're basically, they're consumers, they're controlled and so on and so forth. But and what Besson said is, I don't think these people are losers. I think the system has been rigged against them, and we're changing the system, which is pretty revolutionary for a Treasury Secretary.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, that relates to the experience that we had when we were organizing. We went out to the auto plants during the strike in 2023, and we didn't know what kind of response we were going to get. And I wrote a leaflet, which was Donald Trump's message to auto workers, and it went through his tariff policy and his anti-green policies. And we found then that 60% of the auto workers, despite Sean Fain and the leadership, were for Donald Trump. Well, the first plant we went to was in one of the suburbs. Then we said, all right, let's really put this to the test. Let's go to the Stellantis plant in Detroit, where the workforce is largely a black workforce, black, Hispanic, Muslim, Arab, and so on. Same percentages.
Nice.
Right? Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that if you actually have a producer identity, you know how the world works. You're not just, getting your opinions from your union president or, the fake news. You're actually engaged in a real process in the real world where you think through the consequences of your actions. I always say, if you're engaged in productive activity, you're not allowed to have an opinion, which is wrong because if your opinion is this, you're going to lose your hand. If you're a farmer and your opinion is that you can plant in December, we're all going to starve to death. And you'll rapidly discover your opinion doesn't work. So people who are engaged in the productive process are interfacing with the real world.
Right.
And it actually gives a different identity to people. And they made the right decision in this election. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was probably 70% in some plants from, the reports we got from our auto worker friends. So the more people who can shed the identity of victims and consumers, and start thinking either as producers or I would like to be a producer.
Right.
The less the enemy's psy war is going to operate. And the Civil War scenario, I have no doubt, is one of their scenarios. But we just have to sort of dry up the environment within which something like that would work. And I think
I agree. That's why I keep going back to the entire why the urgency on Trump's part about interest rates, why he went to the war, went to war with Powell publicly, even though that was, I still think it was kayfabe, but I'm not, it was the right thing to do strategically because the goal is to get Fannie and Freddie rolled out of conservatorship so that you can rewrite the underwriting rules. You can open up capital to the middle class and to the small business owners who are having I'm telling you, and you're a small business owner in America. It is nearly impossible to get a traditional conventional 30-year mortgage. It's almost impossible. Here's this pro tip, folks. Make sure your taxes for the year are in. So after the debt, so only apply for a mortgage after the extension deadline and before April 15th. Try between those other 6 months. Forget it. You'll never get it done. Just because it's awful because you can't bring your books in to show that you make money.
Right.
You have no way to do so. Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and all those fucking retards and Barney Frank, that literal fucking retard, put in these stupid friggin' rules that said, well, you got to show us 2 years worth of tax returns. And they know damn well that every small business owner in America doesn't have doesn't file their taxes on time. They barely have enough time to file their taxes anyway. Wouldn't it be lovely, right, with the tariff revenue that's coming in, with everything else, that we can eliminate the income tax for married couples making under 150 grand a year? Sure. They only contribute like 5% to the income tax revenue anyway, or 10%, whatever the hell the number is. It's as Ron DeSantis so eloquently put it, it's budget dust, right? it's like it's the money. He's planning on giving back like a rebate of last year's property taxes to the Floridians, and he's like, it's like $60 million. Like, and in Florida, that's budget dust. We have that in petty cash. Like, it's not even interesting. We should give this money back. And then, of course, there's Ron DeSantis who wants to get rid of property taxes. And this is another one of the old British systems that's been in place for a while. In this case, my friend Ian Burlingame would say the Dutch system of coming in with William the Conqueror and imposing property tax and imposing tribute to the king on even the English people. And then it's spread around the world. This is something that also needs to end. We need I really do feel fundamentally about this, that we're at a certain point that, the libertarians aren't wrong about everything. They're actually right philosophically about a great number of things. They're just wrong about how to actually build anything because they're not interested in building. They're only interested in being critics, not interested in being architects. They should go back and reread The Fountainhead again. Oh, by the way, and actually take the there and remember that they're not Howard Roark. They're the exact. They're Roger Ebert. They're not Howard. They're not Howard Roark. They're Roger Ebert. But that's my.
I'm just sort of kind of anticipating what the administration is going to do. They keep talking about a possible housing emergency. And
No,
I think they know they've got to do something big. They got to set a lot into motion so that people are feeling it
Mhm.
by the middle of next year.
I agree. And that this is why, but I don't think they can do that until after they actually get Fannie and Freddie relisted and do the IPO. Because at that point, Fannie and Freddie being a private company out of conservatorship and with the government as kind of a passive investor, that they can turn around with a board and they can change the housing rules. They can change the underwriting rules of the mortgage industry. So this is very, very important because we have an opportunity during this crisis period to rethink how we are going to build the new society. We've had a society built on old British imperial rules, even though we've been independent for 250 years. We still have
Yeah,
the vestiges of it. The foundations of it are still everywhere, which is why we're still fighting this fight, which is why
yeah,
you've been doing what you've been doing for the last 50 years of your life, and why I've been doing doing this shit for pretty much the last 25 years of mine. So now the question is, what and this is how I broach all this stuff to my daughter, who does not want to understand this stuff. She's 19, but and is skeptical of everything that's happened. I'm like, our goal now is to tear the old system down and provide you with options as to what system you would like to see, you would like to put in place over the course of the next 2 generations when you come into power. And
right.
that's where our mindset has to be. Because if we do that, I think we're not going to get into, a kind of, well, just burn it all down and let God sort them out.
Yeah.
Moment like,
And part of that is, the whole we're the imperialists, the United States is the source of all evil and so on and so forth. And it's really important for people to realize there's an American history that you don't even know,
right.
and it gave us the best. I mean, again, you can be an Italian chauvinist. I'm a Detroit chauvinist. I'm a Michigan chauvinist.
Fair enough.
And, Detroit in 1960 had the highest per capita standard of living in the country
That's right.
because you had productive blue collar jobs, people owned homes, they had generational wealth, they knew their kids. I mean, it would work. You'd come in as a Polish coal miner, you'd work on the assembly line, your kid might have ended up in management and your grandkid would have ended up as an engineer. Well, that's actually my family's history. You know, and that was ripped away from us
Yeah.
with the
No.
assassinations in the 60s and the wars and everything and the counterculture and everything the British hit us with. And we've been gone through a long bunch of decades in pretty much sliding into a dark age. And that began to change in 2016 with Trump's election.
Mm-hmm.
They hit hard, they hit nasty, and we worked our way through it. And as long as I keep saying to people, stay focused and stay mobilized and don't be stupid.
Yeah, it's not hard. Like we're fighting people that are literally like King Canute trying to fight the tide, and they keep telling us that that they're not naked, and we're like looking at them going, but dude, there's your junk is hanging in the wind. We can see it.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you completely, Susan. It took me a long time to see it as well, and the older I get, the more I watch it play itself out. It's clearly obvious what's going on here, and once you start to understand just how much the world actually wants us to lead. That's the
Yeah.
thing that I keep saying over. I keep seeing over and over again. The world wants us. Doesn't want the United States to be running around the world like Rambo without a jockstrap, making a mess of everything to further British imperialism or Dutch imperialism or whatever. Pick your conspiracy of choice.
Go back to
I
Venice.
don't I don't even care at this point. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a different starting point for this, and I don't care.
Well,
Doesn't
that's
work.
an
It doesn't.
important point because it's a principle. It's a principle.
Right.
It's a principle of oligarchy, which means the rule of the few.
Mm-hmm.
And we named our organization when we sort of rebranded Promethean because we just loved the story of Prometheus.
Of course.
Because Prometheus, that play by Aeschylus is so powerful because the gods on Mount Olympus, Zeus, they're the oligarchs.
Right.
It's just the rule of the few who have arbitrary power, and want to. I mean, the whole story of the Trojan War in one ancient Greek poem was that Zeus thought there were too many people on the planet. This is 700 BC, because Mother Earth was complaining because there were too many people. That's why he started the war. I mean, does that sound like, the World Economic Forum today all
Mm-hmm.
over again? But that was the oligarchy. And, Aeschylus in his play takes the mythical figure of Prometheus, who had been of the gods, but broke with them and said, no, I'm going to defend mankind. I'm going to give them fire so they can defend themselves. And, one of the things about fire, which when someone said this to me, it was like one of those, oh, wow, why didn't I ever think about that? Mankind is the only species that's not afraid of fire. We harness it,
Yep.
right? I mean, right there is the difference between man and the animal, and the fact that Prometheus gives fire to mankind. So the principle of humanity versus the oligarchy, let's take it back to Aeschylus, which
Mhm.
is about 480 BC.
Right.
And then and there were obviously empires before that, the Babylonians, the Persians were sort of contiguous with all of that. So it's this idea which moves geographically, in the modern period, you can go from Rome to Venice to the Dutch to the British, where that's still a pretty good geographical, identification for
Mhm.
it. But obviously it's everywhere. And it's an idea.
Right.
It's the idea, people say they have so much money, they have so much power. They have a crappy idea,
Right.
which the universe actually disagrees with. So if enough of you have the right idea, which is, all right, we got to figure out how the universe works, and that's how we've got to organize our society. That's what a republic is. If enough of us get that idea, then they don't have any power. And I think what Donald Trump and the MAGA movement is demonstrating is that process in action.
Yeah, it's a lovely way of putting it. I think it's a great way to kind of wrap this up. I would agree completely. It you know lies are expensive and the truth sells itself. It's not really that very difficult,
Hmm.
really, right?
Right.
And I've been saying this is one of the kind of Thomisms of a corrupt money begets a corrupt society, and lies are expensive and the truth sells itself.
I mean, they do have a habit of killing the people who are on the side of the truth.
Yeah, they
But, at a certain point, they overplay their hand, as they, I think, have just seen.
yeah, I think so, and I think that would be that would be the best eulogy that we can give for Charlie Kirk.
That's right.
Okay. So with that said, Susan Kokinda, this has been wonderful. It's been a little spicier than I expected, which I
Well,
also
good. It's fun.
I enjoyed that tremendously. So we'll do this again at some point in the future. And the next time you and I chat, probably on Crypto Riches Show, we'll continue this conversation. So thank
All
you.
right.
Tell everybody where they can find you. Do the shameless plug thing as
All
they
right. The shameless plug,
sure.
www.prometheanaction.com. We have a free newsletter. I do a weekly show on Wednesday. My colleague does one on Monday and Saturday. We do a live Q&A on Thursday. They're all a lot of fun. We have people from all over the world who participate in this. So please join us and be one of them.
All right. Well, yeah, the thing, that part of the drill. The part of the drill over here is TFL 1728 on Twitter, Patreon/Gold Goats and Guns, TomLuongo.me. Those are the links. Do the thing, buy the newsletter, and keep your stick on the ice.